We want to talk today about what is the goal of a liberal arts education. What are we trying to instill within the individual? What's the creation of a type of person that we're looking at when we speak about getting a liberal arts education?
Patrick, what's the core philosophy behind a liberal arts education, and how does it differ from professional or vocational training?
Well, in vocational training, you're just studying one thing, like to be an engineer or a mechanic. But in a liberal arts education, liberal in this case means broad. You're studying about how everything fits together in terms of sociology, philosophy, literature, history, economy, politics.
So interdisciplinary.
Exactly.
Okay, so is the liberal arts education the same as humanities?
Yeah, it's the same. When we speak of the humanities, we're also speaking of this. And when we were at university, we just scratched the surface. In the United States, the degrees are 4 years, and you have 2 years for your specialty, and you take 2 years.
So the first 2 years,
general
education, and the second 2 years, you just get the major.
Yeah,
is that true?
And yes, and then of course in graduate work, which we're doing now, we're going deeper.
Okay, how does a liberal arts education equip students to differentiate between mere information and deeper knowledge?
There's an important distinction between information and knowledge. We can have a lot of information about various fields. Knowledge, though, is something deeper. Knowledge is how it all fits together. The concept of a liberal arts education is interdisciplinary, as you pointed out, by its very nature. Through the process of being educated in the liberal arts, one will be exposed to a lot of ideas, even ideas that one does not agree with. At least those ideas are there in order to be judged historically and to act as historic reference points. The distinction between enjoyment and appreciation is paramount here. We're all going to have areas which we enjoy more. However, appreciation is the ability to situate ideas historically and use the tools a liberal education provides to do so. A liberal arts education changes the person, or should change the person, because it enables us to subject our own ideas, often implicit, to rigorous evaluation. A liberal arts education changes the individual in helping one to overcome prejudice by giving us the tools to be able to confront ignorance, firstly within ourselves. It's important to know history in order to not repeat the errors of the past. Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat, but it certainly rhymes. The ability to cross-reference through history, philosophical movements, politics, economy, this should become second nature to someone who's educated in the liberal arts. Somebody who's educated in the liberal arts or the humanities should know something about everything: linguistics, economy, sociology, history, science, religion. An art student, for example, who approaches painting from within the framework of a liberal arts education should be able to tell you more than just what painters make up French Impressionism, She should also know something of what was going on in the culture parallel to art.
Which is totally different from experts says, okay, it's not my field.
Mm-hmm. And understand deeply the world in which the painters were operating in and their reactions to the past and their influences. What you're saying is true. A lot of academics don't feel qualified about commenting what's going on in the world today because they say it's not my field. Yeah.
Exactly. You don't want to even try or scratch the surface of something, which is kind of normal.
Good point. Yesterday we watched a speech that Barack Obama gave to a graduation ceremony at a university in New Jersey. There are two themes that I took away. This conviction that he shows that the United States and the world is moving to more and more enlightenment, more and more knowledge. We're evolving. We don't make the mistakes that we made in the past. And then also this theme that kept emerging in his speech about trusting the experts and settle science. I'm not so sure of those two things.
In what ways does a liberal arts education encourage interdisciplinary learning? And why is this important in today's global society?
Liberal arts education, of course, encourages interdisciplinary learning because, we're studying these graduate modules in linguistics, but of course we're having to take philosophy and because they want us to be immersed in a lot of different things. And I think it's so important in today's global society that we have people that can see what's happening around us, but in the context of history. So we know that there are answers from the great thinkers of the past to the things that we're facing today, if we're wise enough to go to them.
Can a liberal arts education provide tools to overcome prejudices and foster more inclusive society? If so, how?
Yeah, well, we hear a lot today about equity and minorities' rights, indigenous voices. I'm concerned, though, in our rush to want to include everyone, diversity is a hot topic these days, but I feel that we forget about the human rights, and academics, especially in Latin America, tend to just go with the flow, even when it comes to these macro narratives that take the world by storm. I think that in the United States, because we're closer to power, we're somehow more skeptical of power and a little bit more skeptical of technology. And at least in the United States, there is an alternative media, there's alternative viewpoints, there's access to an alternative media. Although we don't use it, at least it's there, and being there changes the dynamic of how you relate to these things. You know, I read a lot from kind of the right-wing conservative Jordan Peterson type of thought in the United States and Canada about denigrating Marxism and feminism. And it's good to be able to understand these ideologies of the past, not to take them on as complete ideologies, but just to know that they're there as historic reference points. But I think as a lot of what happens is that people will be interacting with a caricature of viewpoints. And it's very strong if you can criticize ideas you don't agree with, but criticize them from the point of view of actually understanding them. So often what happens is they make a straw man of we make straw man of ideas we don't agree with. You know, that's an expression. It's easy to knock down a straw man, because if you make a straw man, you can just knock him down. And it's good to be able to not talk at cross purposes. It feels very important, and it helps us to be able to hopefully question power and question these macro narratives. You know, the way the world is going now is very different than how it went in the 20th century. The 20th century was dominated by political ideologies like liberalism, communism, and fascism. But now the world is facing something called transhumanism. We hear about the Great Reset. And this is really, cancel culture. And it's replacing these older ideas. And sometimes I even think that it would be good to have a return to classical feminism and classical Marxism, just because what we're facing today could use a little of that. There's a Spanish journalist who wrote that the closures and the quarantines of 2020 was actually the death of the left, because the left had historically been there to defend the rights of workers, not only on the ideological level, but also on the parliamentary level. And the phrase he used was the silent suicide of the left. So nobody voted to have transhumanism, this idea that we're going to merge with machines, artificial intelligence. This is happening so fast. And so if we're not going to use the tools provided for us from sociology, from psychology, from philosophy, then we're not going to be able to offer a response to what's happening all around us. Now, unfortunately, most of those in academic, most of those in the liberal arts, they don't feel qualified because, as you say, they say it's not my field.
Exactly. And how does studying the liberal arts influence an individual's personal and moral development?
It's actually absolutely essential, because that's where we learn about other religions. That's where we learn about other points of view, and it should change the individual.
What challenges do liberal arts programs face in today's education system? And how might these be addressed, in your opinion?
Well, yeah, I think that the challenges are what we were talking about. So absolutely vital for those educated in the liberal arts to question the macro narrative that animates and oriented culture. A narrative is like these stories that we tell ourselves, and the macro narratives of the broad stories that animate and orient the culture. We need to look at alternative views and to be able to articulate opposing viewpoints accurately, even those we may not agree with, rather than just offering up caricatures, simplistic solutions, and straw men that are easy to knock down. New hierarchies are presented to us as progress. There should be more pushback from intellectuals. As knowledge becomes more and more technical, we may understandably leave it to specialists because of the perception that we are not competent to evaluate certain things. The motives may be humility in the first place, but even certain things with real political implications, like it doesn't matter what shape the earth is. So if somebody tells me the earth is flat or a triangle, there's no political implications. If somebody says you have to go stay in your houses because there's a particle in the air that cause people to die, there's some real political implications here. And there's always the danger in trusting the experts, and until we actually looked at a field and opposing viewpoints, we might have the perception that there's no debate and that the experts are much more homogeneous, speaking with one voice, than they really are. The World Economic Forum, which meets once a year at Davos, Switzerland, openly talks about a transhumanist future and a great reset. Of course, it's presented as environmentalism, such as sustainable development and civil science. Looking at this from the point of view of the liberal arts, though, we might ask how little classical feminism, like we saw earlier, or Marxism might be in order here. Because like classical feminism saw that women should have a space of their own that was equal to men, like for competing, like women's sports. Women's sports has totally been destroyed by this new ideology of the transgenderism. So it's interesting how these new ideologies actually clash with ideologies from the past. And I wasn't interested in learning about these things when I was young, but now I see they have their place. Older intellectuals were criticized for being tools of state power, but are we ever any different today? Although it's not state power that we're up against as much now as these international institutions that set world policy.
But Patrick, looking to the future, how should liberal arts curricula evolve to remain relevant and impactful?
Well, in my humble opinion, they need to look at these hijacked narratives and these pseudo events.
But what's the Socratic method?
Okay, so the Socratic method is a way of uncovering that deeper layer of thought and kind of getting at the deep.
I remember we did that
underbelly.
last semester.
Yeah, the Socrates was what we know about Socrates actually comes from the dialogues of Plato, but they speak of him as if he was a real person. He was known for questioning, and he didn't actually come in with his own opinion. He wanted to know what the other people thought. The thing is, once you start doing this, people can get really annoyed. Like if you ask 2 or 3 follow-up questions, like
thought-provoking questions.
Yeah, like if they say they don't believe in God, and so you want to dig in and see. A lot of times you find that people have no idea why they believe what they do. But Socrates, he was able to just question and uncover contradictions, and it has its place, because we tend to be pretty superficial in our lives, and now it'd probably be considered bad manners if somebody says something and you want to question 4 or 5 times. And in the dialogues of Plato, which feature Socrates, I mean, there's a whole book, like 20-30 pages of him just questioning, and often the people that he would be questioning would have a crisis where they realize the contradictions in their own views. But it also comes back to this idea of really being able to articulate the position of your interlocutor, the person that you're interacting with. So Socrates, he really wanted to understand the position of the other person, because so much of the time we just offer up caricatures. Like when a husband and wife go to therapy and they both talk about what the other person says, what the other person believes, and then the spouse might say, that's not what I believe, that's not what I think. There's always the danger when interacting with views that you don't agree with, or you think that you don't agree with. There's always the danger of talking at cross purposes. And so the Socratic method is a way to really drill down and get to, and lots of times you'll find that people don't really have reasons for why they believe what they do, but it's based on prejudice.
How does Rousseau's concept of natural education contribute to the development of a free individual, according to his philosophy?
Yeah, so Rousseau was a figure that was very central to the Enlightenment. He lived in Switzerland, French-speaking part of Switzerland, so he wrote in French. He's considered one of the Enlightenment philosophers, and he really questioned what was this idea of the free individual. And there's a famous saying of his, man is born free, but everywhere enslaved. And he really developed, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, this concept of natural education as a foundational theme on his Emily, or on education. And he wanted the individual to be in harmony with their inherent nature. Now, nobody is really born free. The thing is that we have so many influences around us, and we might not even be aware of all the influences that are around us, that we take on as an implicit philosophy. A lot of ideas are in the air, and we might not even think of them as being directly political. But if we don't have a direct philosophy, we're always going to be vulnerable to having an implicit one. And the sad truth is, to the extent that ideas are taken on, they don't really have to do with how true those ideas are. That's what I've found in my research. They have to do with things like the collective belief system, and to the extent that ideas are valorized, or when those ideas are accompanied by power. You can think of it too as the algorithm. And so I think that to be free, we have to really question these macro narratives, and there's really no way around it.
How should individuals approach discussions on scientific topics like virology, where they may lack formal expertise? They want to guard against fake news. This also goes to the subject of the macro narratives you talk a lot about on your BitChute channel.
Macro narratives, yeah. So we've talked about this before. People say, well, I'm not a specialist, so I can't comment. The thing is that it doesn't require you to be a specialist to understand these things. It does require a little bit of work, but it's not that complicated. And
it's not that deep.
And the way information is more and more technical these days, it gives the impression that it's more complicated than it really is. I mean, I had this conclusion with political activists in the United States where I was trying to get them to work with me on the September 11th issue, and it would show them the pictures of Building 7 falling down in 6 seconds and free fall speed. And they said, no, you need the architect and engineering degree to really know what was going on. I was like, no, just open your eyes. So one of the tools of the lead, one of the systems, one of the techniques of the system is to pretend like something's more complicated than it is. And like questions about like whether we're going to vaccinate the babies or not, although it's often framed in terms of wanting to confront ignorance and disinformation, I think if we really looked at it, we see there's something deeper, and it's important. So thanks to you for listening today. Remember, question more. And we don't know you're a listener until we hear from you. So please consider leaving a comment and telling us how you keep in touch with the show. For now, see ya, don't want to be ya. That's all.
See ya.